here. I'm very happy to be with you.
Thank you. Same thing.
Thank you.
I'm very honored to be able to be here with all of you and being able to have 1 hour conversation with Ryûsuke. So let's start because there's no time to waste. 1 hour will be very quick, and I'm sure that also you have questions, so I don't want to take all the time myself. Well, that goes. No, it's okay. We cannot fall anymore. I have known of your work through Happy Hour.
Yes.
No, but then you research a little bit and you see that there's a lot of work before Happy Hour.
Yes.
No, that maybe we haven't been able to explore that much. So having talked with you and having seen the work, I'm curious to hear about how those films that came before, like somehow form you. No, what's in those films what were the explorations in some of these films that some of them were documentaries, fiction, some of them were more independent work, some of them were not. There's a very interesting mix that I think that we can still see today. So I wonder how they have impact in your formation in a way, you know, in your film education in a way.
Yes, thank you, Matías. 結構そのハッピーアワーぐらいからそのいろんな国際映画祭に呼んでもらうようになって、で自分のキャリアっていうものがそこからその認識してもらうことも多くなったんですけど、その今マティアスが言ったように結構たくさん映画を作ってきてしまったっていうのがあります。皆さんが知らない映画っていうのがおそらく10本近くあるんじゃないかなという気がします。
So Happy Hour was the first film that really started to get invited to international film festivals, and I think a lot of people might think that my career sort of began there. But as you said, Matías, I have made more films before that. I would say maybe about 10 films before.
で3つぐらいちょっと選ぶとすると、一つは2008年に作った「パッション」という映画。これはその東京芸術大学の大学院映像研究科というところの修了制作で、僕はそこで黒沢清さんの学生だったんですけど、そこで作った「パッション」っていうのが自分にとっての修了制作になって、でそれは今も続いている役者たちとの一番最初のコラボレーションになってます。偶然と想像にも出てる人が3人、パッションにも出てます。
So if I were to pick maybe 3 films from that filmography to talk about, first is Passion from 2008. So that was actually my thesis film that I made at Tokyo University of the Arts, where I went to grad school, and I was also a student of Kyoshi Kurosawa there. And in that thesis film, I actually was the first time that I worked with some of the actors that I still work with today. In fact, 3 people who are in Wheel of Fortune Fantasy are actually actors I worked with back then.
でその前にも実は映画を作ってるんですけど、自分自身がそのジョン・カサベテスというまさにこのニューヨークで生まれた監督に影響を受けて作り始めたんだけれども、その時点で少しそのジョン・カサベテスのような映画を作ることを諦めかけていたんですけど、自分がその映画を作る理由っていうのはそこだったはずだということを思い返して、俳優との共同作業っていうものを一番最初に意識した映画です。でそこでたくさん成功したことと失敗したことがあって、それが自分の中でのスタートポイントみたいになっているところがあると思います。
And I had been making films before that too, but I had started making movies because I was really influenced and inspired by John Cassavetes, a very New York filmmaker. But it was around the time when I was also starting to give up the fact that I can make films like him. And instead, I started to think about how I can work with actors, and I was figuring out how to collaborate with my actors. And I was also figuring out what were my successes with them and what wasn't quite working.
でこのパッションっていうものを作った後自分のキャリアっていうのを模索する時間っていうのが始まるんですけれど、でもう一つおそらく皆さんが全く知らない映画として親密さという映画があって、これ4時間15分ぐらい255分あるんですね。
So after Passion, my career still keeps going on. I also made this film called Intimacies, which many of you probably don't know, but that was actually a film that was 255 minutes long.
でこれはどういうものだったかっていうと、映画学校で映画学校で先生として呼んでもらったんですけれど、そこに俳優コースがあって、その、俳優コースの最後の、3ヶ月を担当して、彼らの卒業制作を作るというものでした。
The reason I made that film was that I was invited to be a teacher at a film school, and I was teaching for the last 3 months of the acting course in the school, and the job was to make their thesis film together.
で一番最初に、正直に言うと、その彼らと一番最初に会った時は結構愕然とするというか、これから彼らとその映画を作らなきゃいけないのかっていうことを、思う。でそれはやっぱり彼らはまだ本当に役者になるかどうかも決めていなくて、でいわゆるこの学校終わったとしても、本当に役者としてやっていく人が何人いるだろうっていうような、感じの人たちだったんですね。ただ彼らでただ自分自身が、一体役者と仕事をするっていうことがどういうことか考えたいっていうこともあって、彼らとの3ヶ月っていうのは、自分の人生の中でもとても貴重なものに実はなりました。
So at first, to be quite honest, when I first met these people in class, I was a little bit worried about what might happen, especially because I knew that I had to make a film with them. After all, many of these people were not quite certain if they were going to continue a career in acting. They were sort of figuring out whether they want to do acting even as a career. And whether they will continue beyond this school. But I did know that they were there because they wanted to figure out what life might be as an actor, and the 3 months that I was able to spend with them ended up being a very special time.
3ヶ月の間に、彼らとすごくたくさん話す時間を持ちました。一体どうして演技をしたいのかっていうようなことを、僕自身が、実はいろんな役者さんに聞きたくても聞けなかったようなことを、ある種教師という立場を利用して彼らにたくさん聞いた。でその時に僕が理解したのは、人からどう思われようと彼らには演じる理由があるんだっていうことですね。でそのことはもう尊重しなきゃいけないっていうことをすごく思いました。で実際にそうした結果、その3ヶ月目にできた映画の中で、その撮影の中で、彼らは本当に信じられないような輝きを見せてくれたっていうふうに、僕自身は感じてます。
And in those 3 months, what I did was continuously have a lot of conversations with the students. I asked them why they even wanted to act. I was able to ask questions that I wouldn't generally be able to ask professional actors in a way. I was able to sort of use my position as a teacher to really interview and get to know them. And whatever they were saying, I realized that everybody had a reason why they wanted to act. And that was really important to me, and I decided that that is something that I really must respect. And in making the film, I really saw the way that they shone so brightly afterwards. It was unbelievable.
でちょっと言い忘れたこととしては、この親密さっていうのは演劇を、題材にした映画です。でそういう点ではそのドライブ・マイ・カーともすごくつながるところがある映画なんですけれど、その3ヶ月の間彼らはこの演劇を演じるっていうことをひたすら稽古をしていって、でその演じることを通じて彼らは輝いていった。で演じるっていうことにはそういう力があるんだっていうことを、その3ヶ月っていう時間は僕がそれまで仕事をした中では一番長い期間だったんですけど、その時間をかけることによってそういう輝きが生まれてくるっていうことを実感した最初の体験でした。
One thing I forgot to mention is that with Intimacies, one of the theme of the film was about a play, which means it has something related to Drive My Car in a way. And for the 3 months, we practiced these theater pieces with these plays. And in that, I really saw them shine, and I really realized the power of acting there. And actually, 3 months was the longest I've worked on a project at the time. And so that was also when I realized, spending a lot of time to make a film can also lead to people shining brightly.
でその親密さの作業自体が、どっかしらドキュメンタリー的なところもあった。彼らは結局自分たちの名前のついた、役柄を演じていたりもしたので、フィクションとドキュメンタリーの境目がすごく曖昧な作品でもあったんですけど、この直後に撮ったのが、その3本目というかに挙げたいでドキュメンタリーのシリーズがあります。
So in some ways, there was also a documentary-like element to Intimacies in that everybody played a role that was named after themselves. So in that way, there's this ambiguity between fiction and nonfiction. There's a border that they were on the precipice of. And so now the third film that I would want to talk about is something from a series of documentaries that I made.
なのでそれはまあ3本あるんですね。結局その東北、記録映画3部作っていうふうに名付けて、でこれには共同監督がいます。坂井光という、まあ、僕の大学院の、先輩の人と、それは、東日本大震災という、まあ、その10年前に起きた地震津波原発事故があって、でそこの、まあ、取材記録っていうものが主になっています。自分は東京にいたんですけど、その震災が起きた後、東北に行って津波の被害を受けた人たちのドキュメンタリーを2年かけて作りました。
So this I sort of call the Tohoku Trilogy. It's a series of 3 films. I co-directed this with another director called Ko Sakai, who was somebody senior in my film program. And what we did was we made it right after the Great East Japan earthquake that happened about 10 years ago, with the earthquake and the nuclear accident. And so we went there, and this is sort of a record of our research that we did. We talked to a lot of the victims of the tsunami that happened from the earthquake.
それは、まあ、一番最初はその依頼を受けて行った仕事だったんですけど、ただ自分の中でまあ、とてもまあ、悲惨な出来事があって、そしてものすごくそのことについての、まあ、なんていうのかな、衝撃の強い映像というものがあふれていて、きっと、まあ、おそらく自分自身がフィクションを撮ることのできないタイミングだったということもすごくあるんだと思います。たまたま本当に自分にとって制作をし続けるための、まあ、一つの方法としてドキュメンタリーを撮ることになったっていうところがありました。ただ、まあ、実際に行ってみると一体何を撮ればいいか分からなかったっていうのが、まあ、その時の正直な気持ちです。
This was originally a job that was offered to us, but of course it's surrounding a very terrible incident that happened. A lot of the images that were coming out at the time was incredibly extreme images that were coming out, and because of that, it was also a time for me where I felt that I could not do work in fiction. So doing a documentary actually ended up being one way for me to keep creating. But once I was there in Tohoku, I still wasn't sure what I should actually shoot.
で自分たちはその震災っていうものが何か知りたいっていうことを思って一体何が起きたのかっていうことをインタビューをし始めました。自分たちがまあやっていてでも本当に驚かされたのは、まあ、被災者っていうふうに思っている人たちっていうのが、まあ、本当にまあ自分たちがまあ何でも聞かせてくださいっていうスタンスで聞いていると、まあ、本当に単に被害を受けた人っていうんじゃなくて彼らの人生そのものがまあ語られ出す瞬間っていうものがあって、その時やっぱり彼らはとてもまあ輝いて見える、生命力にあふれて見えるっていうことがあったんですね。
So of course we went in there to really figure out what had actually happened during the earthquake. So we went to go interview and ask what happened, but then doing it, and we're talking to people we're sort of seeing as victims of the earthquake. But when we asked them, when we approached them with the idea that we really want to listen to what they have to say, they weren't just victims, but they were also telling us so much about their life. I was really seeing these moments where their life was coming out of them, and I saw moments where they just shined so brightly.
でその時に共同監督と話していたのは、まあ、なんでこういうことが起こるんだろう、こういうものを我々は 見ることができているんだろうっていうことを、まあ、2人で話した時に、まあ、それは我々がまあ聞いてるからなんだと、すごくシンプルな理由だけど我々が本当に聞きたいって思ってるから彼らはまあ自分たちをまあすごく表現してくれるんだっていうことを我々はまあ結論付けて、でまあその聞くっていうことで自分たちが彼らにとても関心を持っているっていうことをまあ伝えながら、まあ、2年間かけてまあ映画を作りました。でその時にやっぱり自分が最初に撮れるとは思ってなかったようなすごくポジティブなものが撮れた気がしてます。でその結果をまあ劇映画にもう一回持ち帰ろうとしたのがハッピーアワーなんですね。もうすごく長くなりましたけど。
So then, through these experiences, me and my co-director were talking about why are we witnessing these moments where these special things are happening in front of us? And we came to the simple answer that it's because we're listening. We're there because we want to hear what they have to say. And so we continued down this road through this process by asking them by letting them know that we're really interested in knowing about them. And through that, we found that they start to really express themselves. And as we continued down this road, we made this film over a course of 2 years. I think then we ended up shooting things that went beyond what we thought we would end up shooting. We shot things that were very positive in a lot of ways. And then the result of this afterwards is that I then wanted to bring in some of these lessons learned into fiction, and so the result of that is actually Happy Hour.
Yeah, it was too long. Sorry, but it wasn't simple.
Perfect.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, we want to listen to you, so that's great. And again, you've been making movies since even like 2008 or even before, so there's a lot to talk about that. So I appreciate the detail. I brought some quotes so as to trigger some thoughts. And we have talked about this. No, we have talked about Jean Renoir, the French filmmaker. And when I see your movies and I go through your characters, there's one sentence that comes to my mind every time. That is this line from The Rules of the Game, that says, the awful thing about life is this: everyone has their reason. And I feel that this resonates very much with how you think of character, how you think of plot. So I just curious to see how this sentence somehow resonates with you and with your composition of your films.
Thank you. 今弾いてくれた言葉は僕がマティアスに会う前に、僕はマティアス・ピニエロの名前を彼は日本でレトロスペクティブをやっていたので、よく知っていて、で彼がハッピーアワーを見てくれて、でそれに対して、この言葉を弾いてとても評価をしてくれたっていうことを、彼に会う前に知ったんですね。でその時本当に嬉しかったのを覚えています。
So I actually knew about Matías before we actually met about 5 years ago because there were retrospectives of his work happening in Japan. I knew the name, and then I heard that he had watched Happy Hour. And then I also heard that he had praised the work using that quote you just gave, and I was very happy at that time.
Yeah. So
here we are.
Yeah.
Going back.
Yes. このジャンルノワールの言葉を弾いてくれて、本当にすごく光栄なことだと思いました。でただ、ハッピーアワーっていうのは本当にそういうふうに作らないといけなかったっていうところがあると思います。その東北でのドキュメンタリーを撮った後、ハッピーアワーを作るために半年ぐらいのワークショップをやるんですけど、これは演技のワークショップっていうより聞くワークショップだったんですね。というのは聞くことによって、その相手の表現力っていうのは引き出せるはずだから、聞き合う演技の空間みたいなものができたら、お互いの表現力を引き出すような、そういう空間ができるはずだというふうに考えたからです。
I'm very honored that you use Jean Renoir's quote to talk about my work, but I think it all goes down to the fact that I needed to make Happy Hour the way that I did, which is that I was coming out of the documentary that I made in Tohoku, and then I started a 6-month workshop with people, and that workshop was about listening, because I realized that through listening, it brings out people to express themselves. And so I figured if I can get people to listen to each other, that space will be a space of listening and also a space of expression.
でこの聞くワークショップの内容っていうのは、自分が興味あるところに聞きに行ったり、もし有名人だったら、こういう感じでトークイベントを開催してみたり、自分が聞き手を務めてみたり、そしてお互いに参加者同士が聞き合うっていうことをするようなワークショップでした。で特にこのお互いが聞き合うことによってすごくそのワークショップの中で、その信頼関係の網の目みたいなものができていったんですね。
And so in terms of what it practically looked like, the listening workshops, it meant that I just asked people to follow what their interests are. Sometimes if it was a famous person, if it involved a famous person, then we'll invite them and we'll do a talk like this. And sometimes I was the interviewer, and sometimes I asked questions. But we also did this thing where we asked participants to really listen to each other a lot. And by having them do that, I realized a web of relations and a web of trust started to build amongst them.
でこのワークショップは一応その映画を作ることが前提でやってたんですけれど、一番最初、その終わった後に2時間半ぐらいの、映画を作るその脚本っていうのを書きました。でただここで、問題だったのはその関心が与えられる役柄とそうでない役柄っていうものが結構はっきりとしていて、17人参加者がいたんですけれど、彼らはそれまで、ある種平等にその関心を受けていた、そのリスペクトをされていたんだけれど、そのリスペクトがなんかすごく差が出てきてしまう。この映画を作ることによって今までそのワークショップで培われた関係が壊れてしまうような感覚っていうのが、あったんですね。実際そういう反発がありました。
So the premise of this workshop was that we will come out of it with a film. And so I wrote a script that was about 2.5 hours long at the time. But then as I wrote the script, I realized there were differences appearing between the roles, difference of the amount of interest that is spent on each role. There were 17 participants in the workshop. And during the workshop, we had established this feeling of equal respect and equal amount of attention towards each person. But then through the roles, there was differences started to appear in terms of the amount of attention that was spent. And so I felt this breaking of a trust or these relationships happen because of the role. And I felt people pushing back against it.
そのみんなが本当に強く、ある種つながっていた。それは友情というよりは本当に敬意でつながっていて、その中の誰かが無視されたりすると、その場にいる全員がどこか傷ついてしまうような、そういう空間ができていて、だとすればこの空間で出来上がった、とても力強い信頼関係みたいなものをちゃんと映画に持ち込むためには本当にその全員を尊重しないといけないし、その全員を尊重するっていうのは、そこに描かれている役柄の一人一人を尊重する、そのように書かなくてはいけないっていう、ことだったんです。その結果として、何回もリライトを重ねて結果的に映画を、知ってる人は知ってるように5時間17分になったと。
And so we had really established through this space where everybody had really strong relationships. It was slightly different through friendship, but this was this trust that was built through the workshop, through the process, this respect that was built amongst them. And so if one person felt hurt, then everybody was starting to feel hurt by it. And so we felt that I felt that we had to bring this space of trust into the film. And that everybody has to be respected. Everybody has to have the attention spent to them. And so then the roles must be rewritten in that way. And so with that idea, we did many, many rewrites. And as some of you might know, the result was a 5-hour, 17-minute film.
だからもう最初にマティアスが言ってくれたようなジャンルノワールのその引用のようなことっていうのは、そのプロセスの中で起きていったことです。でその前の映画でそれと同じことが同じレベルで達成できていたとは思わなくて、やっぱりハッピーアワーっていうのが自分にとってもすごく決定的な体験だったし、そこで描いたキャラクターのなんていうんですかね、解像度というのかな、その感覚っていうのが、その後の作品にも生きていて、でどのキャラクターもおろそかにできないっていうような感覚は、その時に生まれたものだと思います。
And so when you quote this Jean Renoir quote, I think that sort of appears through the process that I just spoke about. And this kind of feeling was not something that had happened before in my films. And so for me as well, Happy Hour is actually quite a definitive film in terms of the experience that I had. I think after making Happy Hour, I found a more heightened resolution of in my characters. It was more finely tuned, it was more detailed. And I think that has also affected my later works.
Good. Thank you. Second quote.
Oh. Wow.
From Samuel Beckett.
Yes.
Why not? No? And
Yeah.
he writes, no, try again, fail better.
Yes.
And last week we were able to talk and the concept of failure in an idea of how do we produce our films, how do we write, how we understand creative process, and how failure can be a very a positive and nutrient path. So I would like to hear you talk about this concept.
Yes. そのベケットの言葉は今初めて知ったんですけど、すごくいい言葉。
I just heard Beckett's quote for the first time from you.
I can repeat.
No, but it's a really great quote. I really like it.
Yes. その失敗をするっていうことはでもその作っていく上でものすごく本質的なことというか、一体どうやって作ったんですかっていうことをよく聞かれますけど、結局わからないっていうのが本当のところなんですよね。ある時点まで行ってうまくいかなかったって思ったら戻って、でまた違うルートに行ってまたうまくいかなかったら戻ってっていうことを繰り返していくっていうことが創作の一つの道なので、どうやったんだって言われると本当にたまたまこうなった、たまたまこの一本の道ができたっていうのがすごく正直な感覚です。
So I think failure is a fundamental part of creation. At the end of the day, I often get asked this question, how did you make this? And the ultimate answer to that is that I don't really know. I try one way and I keep going and I hit a point where I feel like it didn't quite work. So I go back and then I try again a different way. And it's that kind of process that I do during creation. And I think what I end up with is just this path of creation that I somehow found through that process. And so to be honest, that's just how it all turns out.
でここでもやっぱりそのハッピーアワーの話になるんですけど、ハッピーアワーっていうのはやっぱり自分が今まで体験した中でも、一番贅沢な予算っていう面ではすごく少なかったんですけど、すごく贅沢な映画制作であって、それは2つのことができたと。これはリライトとリテイクっていうことができたっていうことがものすごく大きなことでした。
So making Happy Hour and the story was it was actually a very luxurious time for me. It was a luxurious process in a way. Of course, the budget was very low, but I was able to spend a lot of time. And also, I was able to do two things, which are rewrites and to do retakes.
このリライトとリテイクっていうのは、8ヶ月の撮影期間があって、同時に進んでいったっていう感覚があるんですけれど、リライトをする理由っていうのは基本的にそのキャラクター、物語の中のキャラクターっていうものが、実際に演じるその演者とうまく釣り合っていないって思った時にリライトをするようにしました。それは彼らがこれでは演じられないっていうことをそれはその非職業俳優プロフェッショナルな俳優ではない人がとても多くいたプロジェクトだったので、彼らはこれでは演じられないっていうことをそんなに強い言葉ではないけれど率直に表明してくれたですね。そうすると、自分たちはその演技をサポートするためにも書き換えなきゃいけないっていうことがありました。
So the reason I did rewrites was usually because there's a character in a story, and then I felt that the actor and the character was not balanced in the right way. So that was when I would do rewrites. And with this project, there were many people who were non-professional actors that were part of the project, which meant that I needed to change the roles. I needed to do rewrites in order for the actors to feel like they can perform these roles. They didn't quite say it so harshly, but they were quite clear and apparent in showing that they aren't able to do this when they were trying to act out these roles. And so then I, on my end, had to meet with them by doing rewrites.
で、一番最初はそれは彼らはこのようなドラマティックな展開というもの、劇的な状況っていうのを演じることができないっていうことの方が多かった気がするんですけれど、後半になるとただ彼らはどんどん輝いていったっていうふうにその撮影をしていて感じるんですけど、そうするとこちら側が今の彼らだったらこのようなことを演じられるんじゃないかっていうことを思う要素っていうのが増えていくんですね。その時に今度は演者の力強さとか輝きに合わせて脚本をもっと飛躍させたいっていうふうに思うようになりました。こういう自由なリライトができたっていうのは まあ、本当にでもまだハッピーアワーぐらいしか経験はないですね。
Towards the beginning of the shooting process, what I found was that when the actors were saying, they can't do this moment, it was usually because they felt that the dramatic progression that was happening was too extreme in their part. But later on in the creation process, I found that they were gaining more strength as performers. They were shining more brightly. And I found myself thinking, actually now at this point in time, they might be able to do new things. They might be able to do other things. There were elements that showed that they might be able to do that because their strength as actors were getting stronger. And also they were shining so much brighter, in my opinion. And so then I was able, because of the way we were making happy hours, I was able to rewrite and have the script match this potential that I was seeing. And to be honest, Happy Hour has been the only work so far where I have been able to have this kind of creative process.
でこのリライトっていうのが大きな計画の変更だとすると、リテイクっていうのは日本の撮影現場で本当にすることが難しいものなんですけれど、ただ撮影っていうのは本当に難しいものだから、必ずうまくいかないことがあるんですよね。で必ずうまくいかないことを本当はというか、多くの場合良しとしなくちゃいけないんですけれど、うまくいかなかった時に素直にそれを取り直せるっていうこと、これはうまくいってない、そして自分たちが求めるものに達してないって思った時に取り直せるっていうことがすごく大きなことだと思いました。
So I just spoke about rewrites, but to speak about retakes, at least in the Japanese film industry, it's really difficult to do retakes, at least in our setting. But at the end of the day, shooting is a very difficult process. So there's always something that doesn't work out exactly as planned. But yet, in normal situations, I have to still be okay with these failures or these mistakes or things that just wasn't going as planned. But for this film in particular with Happy Hour, I was allowed to do retakes in order to try to figure out a way to get to where we were trying to go. And that was a really big thing for me.
で小説でも音楽でも書いていて音楽を作っていたとして、違うなって思ったら戻るっていうプロセスが絶対にあるはずなんですね。ただ映画ではそれをするのがすごく難しい。それはその映画っていうのは基本的にはもう必ず個人のスケールを超えた制作体制っていうものが必要とされていて、これを行きつ戻りつさせるっていうことがものすごく難しいからです。ただそれができた時、映画にとってはものすごく力になるんだっていうことをそのハッピーアワーの経験で知りました。でそれを繰り返すのはとても難しいんだけれども、なんとかそれと同じような状況っていうものをその後の映画制作に持ち込みたいっていうことは今も思ってます。
So if you're a writer writing a novel, or perhaps a musician who makes music, I think you might know that if you start writing it a certain way and you think it's wrong, you go back and redo that. But it's hard to do a similar process when you're filmmaking, and I think that's fundamentally because filmmaking is structured in a way which goes beyond the individual. So it's really hard to go forward and then take that back and go take a step back. But through making Happy Hour, I realized that when you are able to do that, there's so much power to that, and you're able to do things that you couldn't ordinarily do. And so since making Happy Hour, I've been trying to create environments where I can bring these elements into the creative process, and I'm still figuring out how to do that.
で自分が喋りすぎているのでマティアスにも聞きたい。この引用に関してマティアスはそして今の話を聞いてどう思ってるんですかっていうことを聞きたい。
Since I've been speaking too much, I really want to ask you a question, Matías.
I have all this.
I want to ask you about how you feel about that particular quote or anything that comes to mind from what I just said.
No, I enjoyed very much. I feel that, I think that in this, I make very independent movies, very small movies, but I still feel that this idea of shooting and reshooting, writing and rewriting was even done in the studio era. Why were they looking at rushes? Just to congratulate themselves? No. I guess that it was to control or get the thing more or this or that. So the idea of writing and rewriting, shooting and reshooting was very much part of the thing, I think, you know? So the idea that we are so far away from that, like, puts me to question the way that we produce our things. So it's something that I'm also interested. I think that I'm working in a way where I include this possibility of like writing, shooting, editing, writing, shooting, and editing in a kind of amateur way, in a way, but I need that, you know?
Yes.
And so, yeah, because I don't know everything in that sense.
Yes.
No, I don't know everything. So I need to expand, and usually accidents are very helpful, or you cannot write an accident in a way, you know. So and that's why I'm interested in cinema as a collaborative discipline, as I think that you also are interested in. I like to work with actors and with the DP and with the producer, because I think that they do something in the film. The film wouldn't be the same. So in that sense of collaboration, I'm going to throw the ball back to you. And this time for the third quote, I actually need you, because I don't have it. Because it has to do, I know that you're Kyoshi Kurosawa has been very important for you.
Yes.
So without being indiscreet, I want you to ask you if you would have a quote by Kyoshi Kurosawa for us, something that he has said to you, or something. You can make it up if you want to. He won't know. But I'm curious about this bond. And I admire him a lot, so I wonder if you can provide us with a Kyoshi Kurosawa quote.
Yes. もうこれはでも本当にまた難しい。というのは、黒沢さんが自分に教えてくれたっていうのは、本当に限りないものがあって、自分のその映画作りっていうのは本当に根本的に変えられたっていうところがあります。そのパッションの前もそのフィルモグラフィーがあるけれど、それはやっぱり本当にその黒沢さんと出会ったことによって全く変わってしまったというふうに思います。でそしてこう言いながらどれを言おうかなって考えてるんですけど、すいません。
That's a very difficult question you just threw at me, but mainly because I really can't express or even tell you just how much Kurosawa had an effect on me, how much he taught me. I feel fundamentally changed by meeting him. And, you know, I do have a filmography before Passion, but Passion was what I made under him. And so as I say this right now, I'm still thinking about what quote to share with you.
また長くなるんですけど、ちょっと2つ言っていいですか。一つはカメラでドラマを撮るなんていうことは矛盾した行為だっていうことですね。非常にもう間違っている行為だっていうことです。
This is going to end up being quite long, but I'm going to say two quotes. One is that he said, "It's fundamentally a mistake to try to capture drama through a camera."
これは一体どういうことを言っているかというと、黒沢さんが韓国に行って、これは黒沢さんの本に書いてあることなんですけれど、韓国に行って学生から彼も映画を作っているその学生からどうしても自分の映画作りがうまくいかないんだと。それはあるセリフを書いて、役者に言ってもらう。その役者っていうのがどうしてもただセリフを覚えて読んでいるような白々しいものになってしまうんだけれど、これは一体どうすればもっと自然になるんですかということをその彼が聞いたと。
And to explain what he means by that, this is actually an anecdote that Kurosawa actually wrote in one of his books. But he met a Korean student in Korea, and the Korean student said to him, you know, my filmmaking just is not going well. The reason being that I have this dialogue that I've written, and then once the actors say it, it just does not come out very naturally. What do I do?
でもそれが自然なんだと、それが当たり前なんだと。なぜならその役者っていうのは、書かれたセリフを、読んで覚えてそのセリフを言っているわけだろうと。つまりそのカメラっていうのは彼がそのセリフを読んで覚えたっていうことをそのまま記録しているんだと。でカメラっていうのはそういう機械なので、そういう記録の機械なのであって、その記録の機械を使ってドラマを作ろうとしている。それがそもそも破綻した矛盾した行為なんだっていうことを黒沢さん言うんです。
And Kurosawa says to the student, well, that's actually quite natural. That's normal. Because at the end of the day, what the actor is doing is the actor is given a line and they're memorizing that line and then saying it back. And the camera, at the end of the day, is a tool that records factual events. So it's recording exactly what happened. It's a tool of recording. So to even think of making drama through a camera is actually a mistaken idea. It's kind of a misplaced idea.
でこれはもう全問答みたいな話なんですけど、ただまあこの話から分かるのはカメラがある体を撮るっていう時はたとえそのスタートとカットそしてフレームでそれが現実から引き剥がされていたとしても、その体が持っていた歴史っていうのは必ず映してしまうっていうことだと、僕は解釈しました。その彼がかつてその脚本を暗記した、暗記しただけなんだっていうその歴史っていうのをそのカメラはそのまま捉えてしまう、それを変更することはできないんだっていうふうに解釈しています。
And the way that I interpret this story is that you know the camera is also, if a camera is capturing a body, a physical body, whether you say you start, you say cut, but then within that there's a body, and in that means that it's also capturing the history of that body. The history that body carries is always present, and so that's how I've interpreted it. It also means that the fact that this actor is here after memorizing the dialogue, that history is also very present.
で黒沢さんっていうのは本当になんていうんですかね、カメラ至上主義者というか、目の前で起きていることだけを信じる、人なんですけど、その人がこう言ったっていうことは、とても大きなことのように思いました。カメラっていうのは現実を断片化することができるんだけれども、だからといってその体が持っているものまで全て取り去ってしまえるわけではない、逆に言うと体っていうのはそれだけ強いものなんだということを学んだ気がします。
And so Kurosawa actually sees the camera as very powerful. But that all said, so the fact that he even said this anecdote to me is a very big deal because the camera is so all powerful. And the camera can cut up reality in a sense. But I think he was also saying that he can't take away from the body what exists in the body. Also can't be all taken away by the camera either. And to me, the interpretation here is that the body is very resilient.
で、その演出家がやらなきゃいけないことっていうのは結局この体とどう付き合っていくか、まずどんな歴史を持った体を選ぶかっていうことと、その撮影のための期間っていうのはすごく短いものだとしても、そこに新たにどんな歴史を加えていくかっていうことがなければ、それは本当に単純に破壊されたドラマだけが映り続けることになるんだということを理解しました。
So as a director, I feel that we need to think about how do we then relate to different bodies? What kind of histories that are in the bodies? What kind of bodies are we choosing? What kinds of histories are we choosing that comes with the bodies? And so even if the shooting period is a very short period of time, I have to also think about what kind of history then I'm adding to that body through what I'm doing. And if I don't think about that, I'll always continuously have a broken connection to drama.
で、ここまでが一つで、もう一つあるんですよ。
So that was the end of my first quote. I have a second one.
で、これはその監督の仕事は何かって、これは直接聞いたことですけど、監督の仕事はもう何か、それはカメラをどこに置くかっていうこと、そしていつスタートをかけていつカットをかけるかっていうことだ、この2つなんだっていうことを言いました。
And so this is related to the director's job. And this is something I actually asked him directly and that he responded. And he answered by saying that as a director, you think about where to put the camera, when to say start, and when to say cut.
で、これもあまりに当たり前な気がするでしょうって。でも僕も聞いてて、何言ってんだろうっていうことをですね、一番最初は思ったんですよ。
So that sounds quite ordinary, right? When I first heard him say that to me, I said, "What is he saying?"
ただ、この一番最初に言ったその引用と合わせて考えると、これはどういうことかっていうと、一体どの程度記録して、一体どの程度、その現実を、フレームの外や、その時間の外に置くのかっていうことを選ぶのが、監督の仕事だっていうことなんです。 すいません。
So when you actually think about the first quote I talked about and put them both together, I think it has to do with how much do you actually record, and then how much do you leave outside of the frame, how much do you leave outside of the time that you're capturing.
例えば顔の前に置くのと、その顔の後ろ、つまり背中を撮るのとでは、映る情報というのは全く違うし、そのことによって、あらわになってしまうものっていうのも当然違う。そして、どこからどこまでをワンショットで撮るかっていうことによって、そのショットが持つリアリティ、その強度っていうものもまた全然違ってくるっていうことなんです。で、この監督の仕事っていうのは、このワンショットの、一体何をどこまで記録するのかっていうことを、ひたすら調整することなんだっていうことをここで黒沢さんは言っているんだと思います。
And again, this is quite simple in a way. If you try to capture somebody from the front and show their face, or you put the camera behind them and you show their back, you're giving different information. You're expressing different things, and it shows different things. And also to think about what that one shot will capture from when to when, from where to where, that is also, there's a lot of power in the difference that happens between those decisions of what you decide to capture. And to think about what are you recording, where are you recording, from where to where are you recording in this one shot.
で、黒沢さんが与えてくれた教えっていうのは、もうカメラっていうのは記録の機械なんだと。で、つまりそれはもうドキュメンタリーに最も向いているような機械なんだっていうことです。それを一体じゃあドラマに使うことができるのかっていうのは、その第一の引用で言ったような、本当に厳しい認識を持った上で、そのカメラを使うことを考えなくちゃいけない。カメラをどう使うのかを調整しなきゃいけないっていうことを黒沢さん教えてくれたような気がしています。
And so, in thinking about what Kurosawa told me, and to go back to his earlier quote, the camera is, at the end of the day, a tool for recording, which means it's probably better suited for something like a documentary. But then if we're going to use this tool to then bring it into fiction, then we first have to understand the fundamental thing about this tool, which is a harsh reality, which is that it is made for recording. And we have to accept that and understand that, and then think about how we then use the camera and try to calculate accordingly.
どうですか?
What do you think?
How do you think?
Good. Thank you. Very generous. Two for the price of one.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. As we only have 10 minutes less, even a little bit less, I think that we have
I'm
to
sorry.
open to the public.
Yeah.
So, oh my God. So,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
should we put like in a bag like names and like?
Yeah. As you know, I'm very bad at control time.
So I'm thinking a number from 1 to 15. The one that. No, wait. Give me 1 second. Give me a second. Okay, I can write it down here so that you say that I'm not a liar. Okay.
2, 6, 14, 9, 8, 15.
No. 4. Yes, 4.
Thank you for being here.
Fortune and fantasy.
So I actually have 2 questions.
Yeah.
One of the main things I've noticed in your films is that there is always a teasing of some kind of a metaphysical or surreal element. That was very evident in The Depths, when the criminal guy, he breaks the mirror wall to help his friend. And I also noticed that in Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, when Meiko addresses to the camera, and she says, like, the magic and illusion, that line. So I was interested in knowing, is there a line between real and magical realism? Is there a line between real and surreal for you? And the other question was, the second question was, your films, they're like emotional thrillers for me. Like every line, there is some kind of a twist, there is some kind of a drama embedded in every line. And I feel like they could just go on and they could just keep happening. The scene could go on for a really long time. Something new will keep happening in that. So where does it end for you? When do you decide to end it?
have to repeat very quickly. The first question is about real and surrealism, the limits between that.
Yeah.
So maybe first that question.
Yes. これは時々なんかマジックリアリズム的だっていうふうに自分のが言われたりするけれど、もう全部リアリズムだと思っているっていうのがもうこれがまずは答えです。
Sometimes I do get compared to this idea of magic realism, but fundamentally speaking, I ultimately think that everything that I depict is rooted in realism.
それはまずその俳優の体っていう問題に帰っていくと、その俳優の体にできることはもう現実にできることでしかない。特に我々の予算の中ではそれでしかないので、現実にできることを取るしかないっていうことがまず一つあります。
And that really goes back to the fact that we're using the bodies of actors. And so what we actually shoot in our film is limited to what they can physically do in reality, especially films of our budget. And so what we see here is realism.
で、もう一つは僕自身がもしかしたらその観客の皆さんが非現実として感じるようなものも現実として信じているっていうことだと思います。自分の映画でそこまでそのファンタジー的なことが起きたものっていうのはごくわずかなものを除いてないと思います。基本的には現実に起きることだけを使って撮っているし、それは現実に起こりうることだっていうふうに僕自身は結構強く信じている。
So at the end of the day, even if other people might take some of the things that happen in my films as something that is unreal. I personally believe quite strongly that everything that I've been depicting can happen in reality, is part of reality, save for very few elements that I've depicted before. But basically, at the end of the day, I feel so strongly that all of these things can happen and will happen and is part of reality.
だから重要なのはその現実を使ってどうやって非現実と見えるようなところまでたどり着くかっていうことです。さっきの話にも似てますが。
So then the important point here is that the question becomes about how to then use reality to bring it to somewhere that might seem unreal. It leads back to sort of things that I talked about earlier.
But there was a second part.
Yeah.
Like when do you decide to end the scene?
Yes.
When he decides to end the scene.
で、これはその話とつながってきて、それが達成されたって思ったらっていうことがあると思います。その現実が、やっぱりその非現実的に見えることっていうのは現実には起こりづらいことなので、その現実に起こりづらいことが、どうやったら起きたって感じられるかっていうこと、それを自分自身が書きながら、その自分自身のリアリティの感覚を壊すことなく、それができた時にようやく終わるというか、次の場面に行けるっていうような気がします。
And this is actually related to what I've just been talking about because it's usually when I felt that I've made that feeling of making something that is rooted in reality also feel like something beyond reality, something that could be unreal. When I feel that I've made it, when I'm writing something, when I feel that I've gotten to the part where without breaking my own sense of reality, I've managed to bring it to this certain level of unrealism, that's when I feel like I can move on to the next scene.
Thank you.
We have for one more. Okay. Again, the number from 1 to 15. I wrote it. 11.
Oh.
Question about casting and how you work with new people and how. No? Sorry to simplify it a lot. I'm sorry.
はい。
For you.
そのキャスティング 90% って言ってたとしたらちょっと言い過ぎかもしれない。70% ぐらいだと思います。ただかなりの割合がそこで決まるっていうのは、さっき言ったような理由で、その人が そこまでたどり着いてきた歴史っていうのを変えるには撮影期間っていうのはまあ短すぎるからです。なのでその脚本で書かれているキャラクターと何かまあ個人的でまあ親密なつながりを作れるような人っていうのをまあキャスティングしないとまあ全て失敗するっていうことがあると思います。
If in the past I had said 90% is casting, I think I was exaggerating. I wouldn't say 90, I would say maybe 70%. But I will say it's a big portion of what I think about. I think, but this again goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, but it's difficult to change the history of that person you're working with, especially because shooting time is so short. The time that you actually spend shooting is so short. You can't make those changes to that person's personal history. So then in thinking about casting, I have to work with people who I feel like I can establish a certain intimacy with in the relationship in order to work with them.
でこの物語のキャラクターと合っているっていうことが一番大事なんですけれど、まあ、その上で、まあ、じゃあどういう人を選ぶかっていうとこれは喋っていて、まあ、魅力的だなっていうことを感じる人です。まあ、自分はそのいわゆるオーディションみたいな時に、まあ、ほとんど演技を見るっていうことはしないのでひたすらただ喋ってます。でその喋ってる時に素敵な人だなって思えば、まあ、その人に頼むようにしています。
And of course, it's important to pick somebody who matches the characters in the story. But beyond that, I think what I also do is that I talk to people and I work with people that I find to be appealing in having conversations with them. When I do these things, what people consider auditions, I don't actually watch them perform very often. Instead, I actually just continue to have conversations with them. I talk with them, and then when I feel that this person is a wonderful person, that's when I offer them the role.
Yeah. 普通に喋っていて、まあ素敵な人だって思えれば、あとは演出はその人が普通に喋れるように、まあ、現場で、まあ、環境を整えればいいということです。もうその人が普通に喋れば魅力的に映るんであれば、それを、まあ、記録すればいい。まあ、それはやっぱ黒沢さんの教えとつながると思うんですけど、その環境を作るっていうことを考えます。
And so the reason why I want to talk quite normally and ordinarily with these people is because once I figure out that this person is wonderful, then I know that all that they need to do is to be able to talk naturally, and that I just need to set up an environment where they can say these things naturally. And so if they're already wonderful there, then all I have to do is record that. And so in that sense, this is where Kurosawa's earlier teaching comes into play.
Good. Last question now, a letter. Letter, not number. H. Yeah, that was easy.
H.
Okay, so my question is, do you find your personality change a little bit when you're directing and you consider yourself hypersensitive? Because, when you're directing, you need to coordinate with the crews and you need to kind of persuade your actors. And also you need to, directing is like a teamwork, right? You're not working alone. And also, do you consider yourself hypersensitive? Because I saw that you can detect something like the kamikaze is not very normal comparing to other people's films. So, yeah. 結構自分の性格が監督してる時に変わってるっていう感じがありました。で、また自分はすごくセンシティブだと思って。
この映画作りの期間っていうのはもう絶対、まあ、人が変わってるというかもう何というのかなその時間だけはまあ、すごくハイパーセンシティブだしすごく誠実な人間だというふうに自分で感じるしまあ、本当に一生この状態は続けられないって思うような状態に映画作りの時間は僕にとってはなります。
How do I say this? Because, when you talk about whether I do change in person, I think you're right. I think I do become very hypersensitive, as you say. It's a time spent where I feel that way, where I feel very honest and very committed. And I know that time that I spend while I'm filmmaking is not a kind of time that I can always have, that I can always continue.
ただそのフィクションを作る時間っていうのはやっぱりすごく正直であることが許されている時間なんだと思います。なんというか人生の中で話していたり付き合っていて常に正直でいるっていうことはできないっていうのは正直なところなんですけど、フィクションを作るとき、正直でなかったら、そのことはやっぱりとても映ると思っているので、フィクションを作っているときだけ、かえって正直であることが許されているような気がしている。普段だったら指摘できないようなこと、今、あなたの状態はこういう状態だから、ここを直さないと我々はいい映画をいいものを作れないんだっていうような指摘を、普通の人間関係ではしないけど、その作品作りの時はできる。この正直になれるっていうことが自分のその能力を開いてくれるっていう感覚はなんとなくある気がします。
I think while you're working within the fiction realm, while you're making fiction, it's a time where honesty is allowed. For example, in our regular daily lives, when we're talking, when we're living our lives, we can't always be honest. I don't think it's possible to always be honest. But if that was happening in a film, not being honest actually shows in the film. So it's during fiction, working in fiction, that we're able to say things that perhaps we can't always say. For example, I could say to someone, you're doing it this way, but in order to make a better film, in order to get a better result, we have to do it this way. And while we're making a film, then that kind of talk is allowed, and honesty actually allows for things to blossom.
Okay. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Matías. 1 hour is very short for us. Very short for us. Sorry.
But we'll have you soon, maybe next year with 3 movies.
Thank you.